Let's now look at how the firm and market level adjustments correspond in a perfectly competitive market. Recall that we said in a perfectly competitive market, any potential entrant will immediately have access to the same technology and inputs and at the same prices as existing firms. That means that we can't, in the long run equilibrium, in other words, in a long run situation where the number of firms is stable, we can't have positive profits. Similarly, in the long run equilibrium, we can't have negative profits because then firms would exit. And so if we have an equilibrium and enough time for firms to adjust all inputs, then it has to be that profits are zero. In that case, P star in the market has to equal minimum of average total cost. And so if each firm has a specific short-run supply curve at that level of production, that means that when we're looking at the market level, recall the axis now is compressed. Could be hundreds or thousands of units as compared to this axis. The fact that demand, which is not determined by firms, of course, the fact that demand has to intersect market supply at this price is actually going to be what determines how many firms can exist in this market in equilibrium. So market supply will simply be the addition horizontally of all the individual supply curves. And so if we know that the equilibrium has to be at P star, then that tells us how much will be sold in that market. This is P star. Well, at that price, each firm wants to produce a very specific amount, Q star, small q. Note that I'm now starting to use small q for the firm level quantity and big Q for market level. That's simply to make it easier to distinguish between the two levels of analysis. And so market level quantity is simply n times firm level quantity, where n is the number of firms in the long run equilibrium. So once demand is given and once we know the cost curves of each firm, we can use that information to determine first price in the market, and then at that price, what quantity sold in the market will be. And then given how much each firm wants to produce at that price, we can determine how many firms the market supports. So what will happen then if there's a change to the system? Suppose that there's an increase in demand. In the short run, new firms won't have time to enter. Instead, existing firms will adjust along their short-run supply curves, and we will have a short-run equilibrium at a price above P star. We can call that PSR for short-run. Well, at that price, each firm will produce more in the short run, and for each firm then, the price will exceed the average total cost. This is the average total cost at the new short run level of production. then this rectangle will represent firm profits in the short run now that there's been an increase in demand. Well, what will be the effect of this? If existing firms earn positive profits, we should expect that to lead to new firm entry. So let's assume that demand stays at this new higher level. What will happen if new firms enter? Well, remember how this market supply curve is simply the horizontal sum of all individual firm supplies? When more firms come in, we're simply going to continue to add to market supply. So another firm. At this new level, we still have a price above P star. That means that firms in this market are still earning positive profit, meaning we're not in the new equilibrium yet. More firms will continue to enter. Until this new equilibrium is again at price P star. As long as price is above P star, we have positive profits for each firm, therefore more firm entry. So we're now going to be back at the same price as before, but of course at the new quantity. What is this reflecting? It's simply reflecting the fact that now with higher demand, this market can support a larger number of firms. Similarly, if we had seen a drop in demand, then short-run equilibrium price would have dipped under P star. Then each firm in the market would have earned negative profits. If demand had dropped a lot, it's possible even that some firms would have shut down in the short run. Either way, in the long run, we would find that firms are exiting, and so market level supply will shift left until we would once again find the equilibrium at P star. And so once again, the cost structure of the firm is what establishes the price level where the firm earns zero profits. In turn, that price and the demand curve in the market tells us how many units are sold. That tells us how many firms this market can support. If there's an increase in demand, for example, that means that in the short run, existing firms will earn positive profits. In the long run, new firms would enter to take advantage of those. That means that market supply will shift right as we add more individual firm supplies. That will continue until the price once again reaches that P star minimum of ATC level, at which point profits are back to zero and there are no more incentives for more firms to come in. So we'll be in a new equilibrium, but at the same price. And in this new equilibrium, a larger quantity will be sold, and so more individual firms will be supported by the market. So if we think about this, we know what short-run supply curves look like because they're simply an aggregation of however many firms happen to be in the market in that particular scenario, so N or N prime. What about the long-run supply in the market? Well, for that, we simply want to mark what the equilibrium is in the long run. This was the original level. This is the new level. If demand dropped, then we would find that the new long-run equilibrium is to the left. So if long-run supply is the curve that intersected with demand gives us the equilibrium in the market, then we're led to the conclusion that long-run market supply in a perfectly competitive market is perfectly elastic at that price, at P star, which is the minimum of average total cost. Once again, the stable market equilibrium is one where the price, P star, equals the minimum of the firm's average total cost, because this is the level where the firm earns exactly zero profits. This means that there are no incentives for either new firms to come in or for existing firms to exit. So if nothing changes independent of the firms, then we should expect that situation to continue, which is why we would call that an equilibrium. If, for example, something does change, such as there's an increase in demand, that would mean that in the short run, firms would each adjust along their short-run supply curves and increase production. At the market level, we would see the mirror image of that happening, because this is simply an aggregation of all the firms in the market. So short-run price will then be higher than P star. At this short-run price, firms would earn positive profits. That would lead to new firm entrants in the long run. As we get more entrants, we're expanding short-run supply. That means that the equilibrium price will decrease. As that happens, profits decrease. That will continue until, once again, profits are zero, which happens only when price equals P star. So now we'll have a new short-run supply. So more firms will be in the market, however many it takes for price to go back down to P star. In other words, the higher demand is, the more firms the market supports. But each firm individually will produce exactly Q star units and charge price P star and have average total cost at the same level.